how could fruit be bad for you? But we've demonstrated in this video that fruit can be bad for you, and certainly how you eat that fruit makes a big difference. And so let's cut the crap, let's keep the berries, let's know the difference between what fruits are high in fructose, which ones are low in fructose, and also keeping in mind your metabolic health. Fruit is natural and healthy, right? So how can it be contributing to obesity? Because not all sugar is created equal. And when it comes to fructose, the story turns dark. Welcome to the Obesity Project. My name is Dr. Mark Shankman. I'm an oral and maxillofacial surgeon who now is specializing in obesity, in insulin resistance, and in type 2 diabetes and other chronic disorders. It is now my personal mission to spread the word, let people know that diet control is a necessary part of controlling all of these chronic, diseases. And it's my mission now to share this information with you guys. So today, episode 28 is Fruit Making You Fat, the truth about natural sugar and fructose, like you see behind me. So what is fructose? Fructose is a simple sugar found naturally in fruit, honey, and root vegetables. Also, it's the main component of high fructose corn syrup, which is used heavily in processed foods and sugary drinks. As I mentioned in yesterday's video, we want to stay away from those highly processed foods. So its chemical structure, it is a monosaccharide. However, it is metabolized very differently than glucose, another monosaccharide. And so that is one of the things that drives kind of what's going on with fructose. It is metabolized very differently than glucose. So let's talk about how fructose and glucose are very different from each other. And before I do that, I do want to let you know that table sugar is actually one molecule of glucose attached to one molecule of fructose. So even if you're not eating fruits like you see behind me, if you're adding table sugar to your coffee, to your cereal, to any products that you're eating throughout the course of the day, you're actually getting fructose. Again, sucrose or table sugar is made up of 1 part glucose, 1 part fructose. So you're getting plenty of fructose, not just in the fruit, but in other items as well. All right, so let's talk about the difference between fructose and glucose. First of all, metabolism. Glucose metabolized by almost every cell in the body. Glucose is almost a universally used source of energy to create ATP in the mitochondria. And so this is a very key component to our energy creation. And of course, we as humans are hybrid engines. We can burn sugar or glucose for energy, or we can burn fat for energy as well. But when we're in sugar burning mode, we're actually burning glucose, and glucose is very efficient and very effective and very necessary. If you don't have any blood glucose level, if it gets to 0, you are dead. So glucose is necessary. So necessary, in fact, if you don't eat any glucose, you don't get any in your diet, your liver is actually going to manufacture glucose out of fat and out of protein. So it is a necessary thing, and but there are some key differences in metabolism. So as I mentioned, glucose metabolized by almost every cell in the body, maybe even every cell in the body, but fructose can only be metabolized by the liver. And this is one of the key differences between glucose and fructose. And we'll get more into depth in that in a moment. Now, which one triggers insulin, or do both trigger insulin? First of all, glucose, we know, absolutely triggers insulin response. Yet fructose actually does not trigger insulin. So there is a fine difference between the two. And of course, if you're trying to decrease insulin triggering, the fructose may be a better alternative, but we'll get into much more about fructose. As far as insulin stimulation of, sorry, not insulin, stimulation of leptin, glucose does stimulate leptin, whereas fructose does not. So we have to give a little bit of information on leptin. As I've mentioned before, I've talked about leptin a little bit, but leptin is essentially a hormone primarily produced by fat cells or adipocytes. All right, so the fat cells release the leptin, this peptide hormone, in your body, and it plays a key role in regulating hunger, energy balance, and body weight. And its nickname is basically the satiety hormone, or it's really a starvation signal blocker. So it provides a feeling of satiety. And in a study by Stanhope et al. In 2009, fructose leads to increased visceral fat, triglycerides, insulin resistance, all compared to glucose. So definitely not a good player when you look at fructose in isolation. Now, how is fructose metabolized? As I mentioned, it is metabolized in the liver, but how is it metabolized in the liver, and why is it a problem? So fructose does bypass normal insulin regulation and goes straight to the liver via portal circulation. So the liver rapidly converts fructose into fat. And this is a process called de novo lipogenesis. So the liver takes other things, puts them together to create fat, and that's why it's called de novo, or creating new from really almost nothing at all, like taking the bits and pieces and the parts, putting them together to create this lipogenesis or this fat molecule. So when you get a ton of fructose coming in, this overwhelms the liver and can create a non-alcoholic fatty liver. Now, many people have heard of fatty liver. This can come from drinking alcohol. And prior to like 1970, the only people we ever saw with fatty liver were people that drank too much, that were alcoholic, because that alcohol gets converted into fatty liver the same way the fructose does. But now, with the advent of this increasing problem of obesity, we're also seeing a lot more fructose in our diet, and this overwhelms the liver and creates this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And there was a study by Lustig in 2012 that demonstrated that excess fructose is metabolically similar to ethanol, which is alcohol, and that's how it actually damages the liver. It's a kind of a similar process. Um, so fructose and metabolic dysfunction, we're going to talk about how these two things kind of go together. So what does fructose do? One, we know it does seem to promote insulin resistance. Even though it doesn't trigger insulin, it does promote insulin resistance because it causes that fatty liver. And the more fat you have in the liver, the more insulin resistant you are. And so that insulin resistance is a result of visceral fat, primarily in liver, but visceral fat accumulation. We also see an increase in uric acid. Now, uric acid is the primary player in gout, but it's not only just about gout. It actually plays a major role in hypertension or high blood pressure. And so what it does is it causes a vascular constriction. So it makes the blood vessels more narrow. And if you narrow the vessels but keep the volume in those vessels the same, you're going to get an increase in pressure. It also, in addition to vascular constriction, it causes sodium retention. So that means there's going to be more sodium in the bloodstream. And where sodium goes, water follows. You're actually going to get an increase in volume, blood volume, because of that sodium retention. So, in addition to vascular constriction and sodium retention, you're also getting some kidney dysfunction, which will not reabsorb the water and the electrolytes properly. So lowering your uric acid can significantly reduce blood pressure, especially in the early stages. In addition to uric acid, we also see a leptin resistance from fructose, and the brain simply doesn't recognize fullness. It doesn't recognize that you've been satiated because of the leptin resistance, and so you're still going to feel hungry. In a study in 2004 by Bray et al., Bray, fructose consumption closely parallels the obesity trending in the US. So those two things, correlational, but does definitely show that those two certainly closely parallel each other. And then Tappy and Lee in 2010 showed that fructose leads to increased lipid synthesis and impairs fat oxidation. So lipid synthesis means you're creating more fat, and fat oxidation is it since it impairs fat oxidation, it's reducing your body's ability to burn fat for fuel. So definitely not some very good things. So, you know, one of the common things that people will ask themselves, wait, are you, Mark, are you trying to tell me that fruit is not really healthy for me? And that's not actually what I'm saying. So is fruit really the same thing as fructose? And the answer is no, there is somewhat of a difference. And not that it doesn't contain fructose, it does, but we're going to talk about the difference between fruit, excuse me, and that fructose in isolation. So first thing, fruit has fiber in it, it has extra water, and it has antioxidants, and all of those things slow absorption. Let's talk about the fiber for a minute. So what the fiber does is it creates a sort of a lattice work or a mesh in the stomach and in the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. And there's two types of fiber. There's insoluble fiber, which creates that kind of meshwork. You can sort of think of it as a colander. It has all of those kind of cross areas that, has holes in between, but it's basically the colander, right? So the insoluble fiber creates that mesh like the colander. And then the let's try that again. Soluble fiber creates sort of a gel and sort of these little blobs that fill those spaces in the colander. So when you eat the fruit, you're getting the insoluble and the soluble fiber, which creates that colander shape or that cross hatching, where the soluble fiber then plugs those holes, and it really dramatically slows down the absorption of the fructose. So whole fruits or foods have things in them that actually slow down absorption and decrease the amount of fructose that you're getting. Some of that fructose will pass through and not get absorbed. So it does also contain a lower, excuse me, overall sugar density compared to juice or soda. So you're going to get less of the fructose in that piece of fruit than you do in a glass of juice or soda. And one of the things that juicing does, if you make the juice yourself, is it's going to destroy that fiber. It's going to break it down. It's going to turn it into, it's going to destroy that meshwork. It's going to prevent those globules from forming, and it's going to allow for spiking sugar. So you don't want to juice your fruit. You want to use the fruit for all of the good products that come along with that fructose. And then dried fruits are even more dangerous because these are nothing more than highly concentrated fructose bombs. So it really highly concentrates those fructose, destroys the fiber, and you get rapid sugar spikes or rapid glucose spikes. And that causes release of insulin, of course. So, um, so whole fruit in moderation is certainly okay. Juice, dried fruits, or excessive amounts of fruits does contribute to developing problems with that fructose. So let's talk about some things that are sort of fructose in disguise, hidden sources of fructose. And it's not that it's sort of hidden, because I'm going to talk about one where it's clearly not hidden, but people misunderstand what that is and then don't realize the damage they're getting from the fructose. So an example of this is high fructose corn syrup. So obviously not in disguise because it actually has high fructose and corn syrup in it. So it's obviously high in fructose, but it's certainly a very concentrated, highly concentrated source of fructose without all those added benefits, without the fiber, without the antioxidants, without the extra water. And these products, this high fructose corn syrup, is actually found in things like soda and ketchup and salad dressings and cereals, yogurts, granola bars, all sorts of different things. So you really have to be sure to read the labels, understand that there's high fructose corn syrup in these, which is very, very dangerous for your liver and certainly contributes to obesity, insulin resistance, and all of those chronic diseases. So the biggest offenders of this fructose in disguise sort of concept are the sugary beverages. So things like soda and sports drinks have tons and tons of this high fructose corn syrup in it, and are very, very damaging in terms of weight loss, in terms of liver function, and fatty liver generation. So you want to avoid those for sure. There was a study by Malik et al. In 2010 where they showed that sugary drink consumption directly was associated with obesity and type 2 diabetes. So this is clearly played out in the research in the literature. All right, so let's talk a little bit about fructose and hormonal obesity. Fructose does not stimulate insulin or leptin, but it does bypass satiety control. And that's really one of the biggest problems. So it makes it really, really easy to overeat and store fat. Now, when you eat it in fruit form, it does stimulate satiety because you get all that water, you get all that fiber, and it stretches the stomach and it creates some satiety. So it's really hard to overeat fruit. Like you eat one piece of fruit, no big deal. You eat 10 pieces of fruit. Most likely you can't even eat 10 pieces of fruit. But you can certainly drink 2 glasses of fruit juice or one glass or one can of soda and get the same amount as in 10 pieces of fruit. So it's much, much easier to overeat and store that fructose or to use that fructose to store fat. Also, chronic exposure does promote metabolic syndrome. So if you get a fatty liver and you become more insulin resistant, you of course get this metabolic syndrome as a result of that. So you might be asking yourself then, does fruit still belong in a healthy diet? And it really kind of depends. The answer is not yes or no, it's maybe. And so it depends on certain things. It depends on your metabolic health. It depends on whether you're insulin resistant or not, and what your fat loss goals are. So if you're perfectly healthy, you're metabolically healthy, you have very little insulin resistance, so you're insulin sensitive, and you're lean and you're not trying to lose fat, then absolutely fruit can be a part of a normal healthy diet. However, the contrary is true as well. If you're metabolically unhealthy, you have very high levels of resistance, you have hypertension, you have hyperglycemia, you have, some of these things that go along with metabolic disorder. If you're obese, you're trying to lose weight, then fruit honestly should probably not be part of your diet. There are some low fructose fruits that you can utilize if you want to keep fruit in your diet, things like berries, citrus, kiwi. These are low fructose fruits. And then there are some fruits that you really want to stay away from that are high in fructose, things like grapes and apples and mangoes and bananas. These are all high fructose types of fruits. So, some takeaways from this video. Fructose itself is not inherently evil, but the dose makes the poison. So, if you eat low levels of fructose, you can get away with it. If you eat high doses of fructose, either by processed fruits, so like, the dried fruits or fruit juices, or the high fructose corn syrup, which increases the dose very dramatically, then it becomes poison. It really does become something that is very dangerous for you and should be avoided. You want to prioritize whole, low fructose fruits. You want to avoid the juices and the processed foods, as I've mentioned, and you want to watch out for those hidden sources of additional fructose. So, if you thought all sugar was created equal, absolutely think again. Definitely share this and tag someone who thinks that fruit juice is healthy. I absolutely believed that when I was growing up and when I was a kid. I thought, other than a glass of milk, I thought fruit juice totally healthy, much better than soda or, other drinks. Fruit juice I thought was totally healthy. How could fruit be bad for you? But we've demonstrated in this video that fruit can be bad for you, and certainly how you eat that fruit makes a big difference. And so let's cut the crap. Let's keep the berries. let's know the difference between what fruits are high in fructose, which ones are low in fructose, and also keeping in mind your metabolic health. So thank you so much for watching this short video on fructose. And make sure you subscribe, share this video with others that think fruit is healthy and that totally fine. Eat all the fruit you want. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Thank you so much for watching.